If you ever feel like you want to be generous with your things, but you don't want to have to be fully generous with every one of your things all the time, or you want to be generous, but you don't also want to feel taken for granted or taken advantage of or unappreciated, then this talk is for you. We are going to talk about material boundaries. When it comes to your things, what are your boundaries? Are you allowed to have boundaries? What do those boundaries look like? Who are you allowed to have those boundaries with? And what does it mean to have material boundaries in the first place? We're going to cover all of this today. So if this describes you, then you are in for a treat. But first, if you're new here, welcome to our incredible little corner on the internet. Take a second, introduce yourself in the comment section below if you are back again. Always good to have you. Special shout out to my shifters. Really good to have you here today. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. The button's about right down there. And if you get something out of the talk, if you could like the video, that would be amazing. Either way, my name is Julia Kristina, and I am a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a coach, and the creator of my membership community, the Shift Society, that you can get more information about in the description below. I help heart-centered humans break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. So, material boundaries, what are they? Well, they're just kind of what they sound like. Your things like your possessions, your home, your car, your money, your jewelry, your furniture, your clothes, your hose, your tent, your sleeping bag, whatever it is that you have that somebody else might want to use or borrow. Those are your items that typically fall under the category of needing a boundary around them. Now, when it comes to your stuff, does this mean that you have to share everything or not share anything? Does it mean that you have to have no boundaries or all the boundaries when it comes to your stuff? And the answer is no to both. It's important that you sit down and decide what's important to you about your things, what you are okay lending out or sharing, what you are okay with how people engage or interact with your things when you are lending them out or sharing them or accommodating them with your stuff in some way. It's important for you to know what is off limits or what might be off limits with certain people. Maybe you have no problem lending your car to your best friend, but not super comfortable lending your car to your friend's friend who is visiting from out of town. The point is, you get to decide the rules for your things. And having that clarity and communicating those boundaries is going to be what helps to prevent resentment and preserve your relationships. As we've talked about before, boundaries are not about keeping people out. Boundaries are about saying, I invite you in, and these are the rules if you want to come in. Communicating this is really important so that others can understand where your expectations are and where your boundaries are. So let's get into this. What does it sound like to have material boundaries? I'm going to give you a few specific examples, and then we're going to talk more about some of the nuances and how this can be handled in different kinds of relationships. So a material boundary might sound something like, yes, you can borrow my hose. Do you mind winding it up like it is now when you give it back? So again, having a material boundary isn't an all or nothing. It's not a free-for-all where you can have anything that's mine or use anything that's mine or treat anything that's mine in any way that you want, or saying, no, never, I don't share, I'm not being generous, I'm not being helpful, and then having those rigidness. So it's not about being a doormat. It's also not about being super rigid. It's about finding that space in the middle where you feel comfortable, where you are clear, so that you're not lending your hose, having no parameters around it, having no requests around it, and then the person gives it back and it's all in a tangled, dirty mess. And you're like, that person, how could they do that? And you get all bitter and resentful and you're like, they're so ungrateful. How could they treat my things like that? Where to them, they may not be that person who pays that attention to detail. Maybe they don't wind up their own hose that they no longer have because I'm borrowing yours, but that's not typically their idea about how to treat a hose. So it's not even within their frame of reference of something that they would think to do. So this is why we want to make that clear. Not everybody is coming with the same set of rules, with the same set of ideas, with the same formula on how to treat other people's things. And if they don't know what we want or need or expect, then it's not really fair for us to get all angry and bitter and resentful when they don't adhere to those wants, needs, or preferences. So boundaries just mean that we are clear, and it really helps to clear up any future resentment, anger, or upset. It also can sound something like, hey, I'm happy to lend you my car. It's all gassed up now. So if you don't mind gassing it up or giving her a fill up before you return it, that would be great. So it's clear. This is my expectation. Happy to lend you this thing. Happy to have you use it. This is my expectation about how I want it returned. You could say something too, like if you're not comfortable lending out your car, just saying quite clearly, I'm sorry, I'm just not comfortable lending out my car. You can add to it by saying, I use it frequently and it's something I really rely on, so I need to be able to have access to it all the time. I use it every day, and so I can't be without it for an extended period of time. Or you can just plainly say, my car is just one of those things that I'm just not comfortable lending out. I hope you understand. Clear as clear, doesn't need to be anything more than that. Another example, and this can be a tricky one, when someone asks to borrow money. So what do? It's a friend, it's a family member, maybe it's your neighbor, and they ask to borrow money from you. And for you, there is a clear line in the sand about lending out money. It is something you are not comfortable doing. It is something you do not like doing. It is something you are not going to do. So being able to just clearly say to them, I have a personal policy to not lend out big sums of money. Now, I've heard this rule when it comes to lending money to friends or family, that if you are going to lend out money, lend the amount that you feel comfortable never seeing again. So going under the expectation that this person is not going to pay you back. Now, I'm not saying that no one ever pays back family or friends, but it can create so many problems in relationships because people kind of have different ideas about timelines of paying back, or about whether or not they actually have to pay the person back, or if a certain amount of time goes by without paying back, then it's kind of forgotten. Or maybe they have this idea that they did all these things for you at some point, so they shouldn't have to pay you back. And, it just can get really sticky. And so the rule of thumb to prevent a lot of this resentment is to only lend out the amount of money that you feel comfortable never seeing again. Or if that amount is nothing, then you don't lend out money, and being able to say, I have a personal policy that I do not lend out large sums of money or even any money at all. Now, a caveat to that, where if you do want to lend out a larger sum of money and it is something that you do want to see again, having legal documents drawn up about it, having some kind of clear contract in writing, signed by both parties, having it signed by a lawyer if you need to, or whoever it is that can authorize those type of things, just making it clear, not because you're trying to be difficult or rigid or because you don't trust the person, but just because having everything out and up and out in the open helps to prevent any misunderstanding, any upset, any kind of lack of clarity around this money and the payback schedule, and if there's interest or not interest, or how much of it needs to be paid back, or whatever it is. Because relationships and money get messy. And so to prevent this mess, if you were like, you know what, I have the means, I am wanting to help out and lend the person this money, but having that clarity around it. If you are really expecting to see that money again, having it in writing is going to prevent so much upset. I can't tell you how many relationships I have both read about and experienced and counseled people about that have been destroyed because of money being lent with a handshake, without that clarity, without the things in writing, with the expectations not being in alignment by both parties. So having that written out. So you're allowed to say either, no, I don't lend money, or yes, I do lend money. And in order to lend that money, this is what I require, or this is what we're going to need to do, or this is what I want us to do before this happens. However you choose to word it, that is going to be up to you. And also you finding the wording that makes the most sense for you. That said, no matter what wording you choose, make sure that you are speaking clearly. I know for many of you who tend to be more highly sensitive or empathic people, you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, you don't want to step on their toes, you don't want to upset anyone. You're trying to be very careful with how you say things, but it can often come at the expense of clarity. And so then messages are not being communicated. There's not the understanding through your words that you hope that there is. So making sure that there is that clarity. You can be kind and clear. I teach this a lot and in depth with people who really struggle with this because I've worked with a lot of people that have struggled with it. I personally have struggled with it a lot. And so really formulating that language that feels good for you, but that is also clear and is preserving of your relationships. Another boundary when it comes to your stuff, being able to set some time frames around it. So being able to say something like, hey, I'm happy to lend you this dress or this shirt or this tent or whatever it is of yours that you're just okay to lend out, but being able to say, but I need it back by Friday, or I will need it back by the weekend. Setting a clear timeline around it, especially if it's something that you want to make sure you get it back, is going to be important. When it comes to a book, maybe you're just okay to lend out your books and you're like, if I see it again, great. If I don't, no problem. But if you're like, this is one of my favorite books and I want to make sure that I get it back, it's a staple in my library. I want to keep this copy. I've got notes in the margin, whatever it is. It's just important to you being able to say, happy to lend it out. Could you give it back in a month? And then going into your calendar on your own calendar and marking in that month mark, and then setting that reminder to follow up with that person to get it back, or ask them to put a reminder in their calendar to make sure that they follow up with you and give it back to you at that time. So having some time frames within there as well, that is absolutely allowed. And that's great because then there's that clarity where you can be generous. Often it's a lot easier for us to be generous when we know where the edges are. The next one. When it comes to people being in your space. And this could be having house guests, having family, having friends, just having people in your space and just asking them for how you would like them to engage with your space when you're there. It could be simple things like, do you mind, if you're the last one up, if you have a house guest in your house, if you're the last one up, can you just turn off all the lights, make sure the doors are locked, and just make sure the living room is kind of tidy and things are put away. Or saying things like, can you just make sure the remote control goes back into this spot? That's a remote spot. Then we always know where to find it. When my niece and nephew were visiting a few months ago, they were staying in my home. And they asked me a few times while they were here, they'd say, can I make myself a snack? Can I make myself a piece of toast or a bagel or grab something out of the fridge? I was like, absolutely no problem. But please make sure you put everything away when you're done and you leave the space the way you found it. Because I noticed that the first time when they made themselves a snack, they kind of left crummies and cutting boards and dirty knives and bread bags open kind of all over. And that's not because they're bad kids. It's not because they're, thoughtless, selfish kids. It's just they didn't know what my expectations were for my space. And I tend to like things a certain way. So instead of me being like, oh, those kids leaving a mess, I mean, they're not kids, they're teenagers. Instead of being like, oh, those teenagers leaving a mess. Now I have to clean it up and it's more work for me. I could either just be like, you know what? I am fine to clean it up. That's no big deal. But if it is a big deal and I don't like doing that and I am starting to become resentful around it, then it's up to me to communicate that and say exactly what I just said. If you take something out, no problem. You're welcome to it. Please make sure you put it all away, clean it up, and leave everything the way that you found it. There we go. It's clear. So thinking about for yourself, when it comes to your things, what are you okay to lend out? What are you not okay to lend out? You're also allowed to say about something that you're not comfortable lending out. Maybe it is a really prized book of yours saying, you know what, I'm just not comfortable lending this out. It has a lot of emotional value to me. Making sure that you are clear on what you're okay with, what you are not okay with, the parameters, the time frames, the extent, the ways. Having all of that clear and communicating it when it comes to your stuff. So many relationships are fractured or even broken through people borrowing things being lent out, and then someone feeling like they've been taken advantage of, like they've been treated unfairly, like they haven't been appreciated, like something didn't go the way that they were expecting it to, but didn't communicate those expectations. And then that resentment, that anger, that frustration causes damage to relationships. So boundaries don't mean you are mean. Boundaries mean you are clear. And the more clear we are in our wants and needs and preferences, the more clear other people are on them as well, and can, instead of trying to wonder and guess what our expectations are, they know, and then they have more of an opportunity to abide by them or respect them when they actually know what they are. Violations of these boundaries. We mentioned a little bit about what those can be, but let's go a little bit deeper into understanding what violations of material boundaries can look like. It can look like people borrowing something from you, and then never returning it, even though you made it clear that you wanted them to. It can look like people just stealing your possessions or taking them without asking, or people just expecting that you keep giving them things. Maybe they borrowed something from you once, and instead of asking, they just take it. They're like, oh, well, she let me use it last time, so I'm just going to use it again. And that's okay if you have that kind of relationship where there is that understanding. Again, there are no rules around what you should lend or how you should lend it or what your parameters should be. There's no kind of divine universal truth around thou shalt only lend with these specific parameters around those items. Absolutely not. You get to decide. And how you'll know that it's time to make that decision and communicate that decision is when you start feeling angry, bitter, resentful, taken for granted, or taken advantage of, because someone is not treating your things the way you want them to be treated. And only you get to decide how you want those things to be treated. Other violations can look like people using things like possessions or money to manipulate you, where, like we mentioned before, someone says something like, well, I lent you money. Now you have to do everything that I want you to do all the time because I gave you this thing. And so they're kind of using that thing against you. Or they say, well, I did this thing for you. Now they didn't communicate what their expectation was for something in return, but now they've just sort of decided after the fact, well, I lend this to you, so now you have to lend this to me. You have to give this to me. You owe me this, even though that expectation was not communicated before the thing in question was exchanged. Are you with me? So when there's kind of feels like things are being manipulated, where you feel kind of taken advantage of, or people are trying to control you with stuff, those are material boundaries. Where things can get sticky with family. Depending on your family dynamic, there might be a sibling dynamic where when you were kids, you shared everything. You went into your sister's closet, she went into yours, your brother borrowed your stuff, you took his car whenever you wanted, and that was just okay. Everyone just sort of dealt with it. Everyone was okay with it. But now as adults, with your own families, living in your own homes, there can be people in the family who still can have these ideas or expectations that what's yours is mine and what's mine is ours. Where I get access to everything that is yours because we are family. And that might be okay with you. And that's fine if that's okay with you. No one's here to say that it can't be. But if it's not, then it is up to you to start stating those boundaries, to start making that clear. And you can even call it out and say, hey, I know that we used to share everything as kids, but now I am an adult with my own stuff in my own place, and I've spent money on my own things, and I would like to be asked permission to use things. And there might be times where I do say no for whatever reason, and I'm going to ask that you respect that, and vice versa. I welcome you to have parameters and boundaries around your things and require that I ask permission and be willing to accept a no. With parents, again, a couple different dynamics can go on here. If your parents gave you a lot and they sacrificed a lot and you really just feel like they gave so much for me, I owe them now. I can't have any boundaries with them. I have to be available to them, do whatever they want, give them whatever they want, try to make up for that. And if you want to do that and you feel totally full and free doing that, and it feels so great to do that, amazing. But if there is this sort of feeling of guilt or obligation or even resentment that's building under the surface in the meantime, then it's not okay. And that's where it's important for you to take a step back and say, okay, what's not feeling good about this? And what do I need to sort out? And maybe what boundaries do I need to have in this relationship, not to create distance, but to create clarity and prevent bitterness and resentment. Now, it can go the other way. Maybe you have parents that think, I gave you so much. I raised you. I put a roof over your head and gave you food to eat and clothes to put on your body. You owe me. You're not allowed to have boundaries with me. You have to do whatever I want, whenever I want, and there can't be any limits to it. And that, to you, might feel really icky. If it feels icky, that kind of ick feeling in your gut, that is the sign that something is not okay. Something needs to be brought out, looked at, sorted through, and you to address and then set boundaries around. Maybe it's that someone in your life, a parent or a sibling or whomever, has been helping you out with something that they offered to help out with, and they said that they would do it, didn't sort of say which strings were attached, or clearly that there were some strings attached, which it can be more of a transaction. They can say, hey, I'm going to help you out with this, and then I would ask that you, in return, do this for me. Great, no problem. It's clear, everyone knows. But where it can run into problems is when someone offers to help, and then they sort of have these secret expectations of reciprocation afterwards that you don't really know about, but you can feel it. Let me give you an example. Several years ago, when my kids were smaller, my parents would generously and graciously come into town once a week and look after my kids because they'd said that they wanted to, and they wanted to be there. And it was good for them. It was good for the kids. It was good for us. It just worked. And so I thought everything was going well until I started to get these little kind of bits of feelings that whenever either of my parents asked me to do something for them, I had to do it. I had to drop everything and do it without hesitation or kind of parameters within there. And that didn't feel really great. And then it started to kind of come up that whenever we'd go out for a meal, we'd go for brunch, we'd go for dinner somewhere, that we were expected to pay. And I am more than happy to pay. And I love being generous. And you probably know that feeling where you love being generous when it feels like you're being generous instead of someone just sort of expecting you to give something to them. That doesn't feel the best. And so started to kind of feel like, oh man, I feel like there's these unspoken expectations that aren't feeling great. And so then it was up to me, instead of, bad mouthing or talking about them, I can't believe they expect this, or I can't believe they did this, I can't believe that they want me to do this for them, or that they expect I should drop everything. Instead of doing that, taking the emotionally mature way and being able to have a conversation about it and be able to say, hey, what are your expectations, or what would you like in return for you helping us out with the kids in these ways. And once we brought everything out into the open, it became a lot more clear. Everyone understood each other, and there were some things that they did expect. And we were able to talk about it, and I was able to express and say, you know what, I'm not able to always drop everything. Happy to help out. Can you give me a little bit of notice? Can it not be sort of a last minute thing because that's really hard with my work or with my schedule or whatever? And we were able to figure things out so that everyone felt a lot better about it. When it comes to communication, often it's not less is more, it's more is more. We need to be communicating more. We need more clarity. We need to understand where people are coming from more, not less. People don't always know what our ideas, wants, preferences, and needs are, and we don't know always what theirs are until we know, until it's clearly communicated, and then we can work with each other from there. What you are going to find is that the more you set boundaries, the more you're going to be able to recognize them. The more you're going to be able to pick up on the first signs that a boundary has been crossed or is about to be crossed, because you're also going to start tuning into your body more, what it feels like, or even to your mind more, what's going through your head when this is happening. You're going to be able to tune in more to when something isn't okay. You're going to know why it isn't okay, and then you're going to be more able to speak up and say and sort through what is going to help make things okay. In setting boundaries, we are using clarity to set the relationship up for success. Boundaries don't mean you are mean. Boundaries mean that you are clear. And as the quote by Prentice Hemphill goes, boundaries are the space between which I can love me and you simultaneously. What connected with you? What are some of your material boundaries that you're like, I just realized that this was a boundary for me and I haven't been setting it? Or I'm going to set this one, but I'm going to set it with some parameters. Or, you know what? I just need to set this one clear line in the sand. This is not okay with me. I don't want to do this. This doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. And I'm going to give myself the space and the freedom to do that because I'm allowed. Let me know in the comment section below. As always, amazing to have you here. And until next time, take good care.